Welcome to Superchargers. I'm Daniel Thomas. Let's go. G'day, guys. My guest on this episode is Joe Casabona. Joe is a successful podcaster and automation coach, and he helps solopreneurs save time, particularly when it comes to balancing family life. Enjoy this one, guys.
One thing we have in common is fatherhood, and fatherhood was a massive game changer for me in terms of prioritizing time, and it sounds like that was very much the case for you. So I'm wondering a little bit of your backstory in terms of what led you to podcasting and also how that fatherhood changed the game for you.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed consuming podcasts for a while, and then I had the thought that probably everybody who listens to a podcast has, which is I can do that. My first foray was terrible into it though. It was like I did like a panel podcast with my friends over Skype, and I'm like bad at moderating, and we didn't do any research. So it was just kind of us talking. It was bad. But after that, I learned all of my lessons. I launched a new show. And it was a really good way for me to connect with people because, as I mentioned, kind of in the earlier, I guess maybe pre-record, um, I'm a transplant to Philly from New York, and so I'm away from my friends and family. I work remotely, and so podcasting was a way to allow me to connect with people. I'm an extrovert, and I really love that. The way fatherhood changed the game for me was I was working at an agency while running my podcast, and my podcast was sponsored, so I was making pretty good money from that, like good side hustle money. And when my daughter was born, I realized that working at an agency was incompatible with the type of dad I wanted to be. And so with a 3 month old at home, I left my agency job, realized that side hustle money is not full time job money or full time employment money, and really had to get things into gear. So I started reaching out to my network. I got sponsors. I found some work, and I was able to make the whole thing work. But like the first change I saw with fatherhood was like I want to be around for my kids. I don't want to have to work nights and weekends, and it put the urgency to make money in me because I was like, hey, I actually have a family to support now.
Yeah, for sure. No, and I can also relate to the kind of isolation thing, like doing this from here, like connecting with people from all over the world. It's kind of awesome because sometimes, being in a foreign country, it can feel a little bit isolating. So a little bit of the same deal there. Um, might be a bit of a random place to start, but I read one of your posts about pitching to be a guest on a show. And it resonated with me because I'm in the same boat in terms of receiving a lot of guest pitches, which I am truly grateful for. Like you say, when I first started, I was happy to find people and chase people, and to now have like people coming to me and stuff like that's really, really cool. But I have had some frustrations with those, and I liked your analogy in terms of the Men in Black, the sugar water thing in
Oh yeah.
terms, yeah. No,
Yes.
in terms of that being a thing that just didn't kind of sit right, and you were essentially saying that if somebody just emails you a copy and paste, it doesn't kind of sit right with you, and that's not so cool. So I just a couple of my frustrations, and then I get into yours and what's the best way to do it. But yeah, for me, like if somebody doesn't just kick off by just addressing me personally, like I don't go much further than that. Like it's not hard to just address somebody personally. The other thing is if somebody sends me pages of text, I can't read, like I'm not going to read mountains of text. So I guess it's finding that balance between, too little and too much. But also like you said, how can this person offer something that's in line with the show? That's a good one. Have they at least listened? Um, Stuff like that. So I'm wondering your thoughts on the guest pitching side of things.
Yeah, for sure. It kind of reminds me of if you've ever been to a mall, like the guys in the middle who were just like trying to sell
I
cologne and like spray cologne on you or whatever. And you're like, I have no interest, like I'm allergic, like it smells bad, like I don't want that. They don't ask you, are you interested first? They just kind of like, here, like shove it. And that is so frustrating, right? And so when you pitch someone to go on their podcast, you need to remember that the host should be the gatekeeper for their audience. A good host always has their audience in mind first. That means don't start with how great you are and don't start with how great the host is. Start with, I think your show is about this based on what I've seen. And I think I can add value. Well, say, based on what your show is about. Don't say I think your show is about. You can figure that out quickly. The I think statement comes in. I think I can add value for your audience by talking about this. And this is what I always try to do, whether we match on Podmatch or I'm just doing a cold email to somebody. I always look at who their show is for, and then how can I leverage my expertise specifically for that audience. And what that tells the host right off the bat is you have their audience in mind and you've done your research to make sure you're going to deliver value for them. Then you can get into how much you love the show or like what makes you so great, but hook them with what's in it for the audience. That's the most important part.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to go, I think. Yeah, the shopping mall thing.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, my favorite is like, hey, Joe, I listened to your second most recent episode and I thought it was great. Here's the person I want to be on your show.
Mm.
And that's usually like, pitching agencies bother me the most because they should know the best, but to them, it's just a numbers game. They can go back to their clients and be like, I pitched 50 podcasts today. None of them are going to hit because all the pitches are terrible, but
Mm.
it's a numbers game.
I've had the same frustration actually with those pitching agencies. I'm like, I understand the person's and what we're going to talk about is automation. And so I get that if you're a CEO or whatever, you obviously delegate that, get me on some shows. But those pitches just seem a little kind of wild and varied. And yeah, I found those strange because I always want to just try and connect with the person directly. I understand that's not always possible. But yeah, it's interesting you say that because I've had the same frustration with it.
Yeah, I think about it as like mass production versus
Mm.
handmade, right? Like you can just cast a wide net and email every podcast in your database and hope something sticks. Or you can email 10 podcasters that you actually have a relationship with, and I will bet 9 out of 10 of those hit. And that's the important part. Like somebody pitched me and they're like, hey, I can get you on 5 podcasts a month. And I'm like, how are you going to get me on more than one per week? Like, tell me about the relationships that you have with these podcasters. And they say, oh, well, we have a database. And I'm like, I'm not looking for contact information. Tell me the relationships you have. And they're like, oh, well, we're just getting started. And I'm like, so you're going to spam people. And I don't want you spamming on my behalf. I hate
Mm.
that.
Mm. No, establishing true personal connections. Like, I just think that's awesome. Like, even the short time that we meet as fellow podcasters, like just establishing that and building this community of hosts and stuff is pretty cool. And that was something I didn't expect, actually. Like, I didn't expect that, we're all in this together and how can we all help each other out, which is a good mentality to have, I think. So in terms of the automation side of things, I think I might be a good case example because I'm very much like a one-man band and I'm not automating a lot at the moment. And for listeners who might be interested in even just starting a podcast, like we know firsthand, like that in itself can be overwhelming. But now with the introduction of AI and all this automation stuff, I've also found that overwhelming. I'm like, I don't even know what's best for me to automate and what are the things, I've tried to be clear about what are the things I'm happy to prioritize my time into. And essentially it's the conversation. I do like the editing and things like that. but I don't have a lot of automation processes. So where would you recommend someone like me who's I've just done my 100th interview, so I'm
Nice.
fairly appreciate it. So I'm fairly well into the game. I have a lot of systems going on, but I think with your knowledge, I think I'm someone who could like benefit from this automation stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I always, for a while I've always envisioned somebody telling you, like just telling you need to automate is kind of like telling someone you need to get to your wedding without saying like what time it is or what day it is or how like where it's at. Um just saying you need to automate is like 20% of the education part, right? Because you may not know what's possible. You don't know where to start. It's such a vast thing. It's like, it's kind of if you go to like a library that's not organized, it's just a pile of books. Like, oh, how do I find what I need? So the way that I tell people to start thinking about both automation and delegation, right, is they want to build SOPs, standard operating procedures, and in order to do that, you need to know what you do. So I have a method called the PER method, PER, where the P stands for perform. As you do a task, write down everything you do for that task. You don't need to do it like as you're doing it, but right before or right after. Okay, so I'm going to look for guests. What am I going to do? I'm going to go to Podmatch. I'm going to read their bio, or I'm going to search social media for people who are talking about whatever, being a solopreneur, or being a parent, or whatever. Um, and then I'm going to find their email address. I'm going to reach out to them. I'm going to send this email. So you have all of those steps. That's the perform method. You're documenting everything you do. You need to document because if you find that you can't give it to, I say a robot, right? This is an automation tool like Zapier or make.com. Then you want to give it to a person and they're going to need that step by step list, right? So that is the perform part of PER. The E is evaluate. Now you're going to ask yourself a number of questions. Is this something I have to do? Right? Maybe you're doing something because you thought you had to do it. And if you just take it out, it's not going to affect your process. That's easy, right? Just eliminate it, right? But you are probably doing things that have to be done. And so the next question is, do I personally need to do this? And in a lot of situations, the answer is no, right? There is going to be somebody who can do it better or something that can do it better or faster or more consistently. Really good example is if you are scheduling an interview and you're not using a scheduling link, you don't need to do that. You don't need to go back and forth and figure out time zone math, right? You just send them a link and it does the conversion for you. And then it sets up the emails for you as well. So I use cal.com, but Calendly, SavvyCal, whatever, Book Like a Boss, all of these tools will allow you to set up an automated email that goes out a week before, 24 hours before, 1 hour before, whatever works best for you. And you don't have to worry about communicating with the guest anymore. So that is evaluate. Do I need to do it? Um, you also want to consider there. I have like I'll put this on a page for you. I have like a graphic that I drew up for
Mm.
this. So I'll put this on a page and we can put it in the show notes. But you also want to consider the inputs and the outputs because when you decide if you're going to automate or delegate, the inputs and the outputs are going to matter. Are they very clear, consistent inputs? Again, with the scheduling example, I need name, I need email address, and I need a time. What's the output? Is the output always going to be the same? Yes, the output is going to be a calendar invite that goes to both of us, right? If it's not consistent inputs and outputs, then a person will probably need to do it. So that's kind of how I determine, am I going to automate or delegate? Are the inputs and outputs clear and consistent? And then the R is remove. Take it off of your plate. Either get rid of it completely, use a tool like Zapier to automate it, or delegate it to a virtual assistant or a contractor, right? In the case of editing, right? Editing, there's not clear inputs and outputs. So a person would have to do that. And so you set up a process with them to get the files, how you're going to communicate the changes you want to make, and then give them a process for how they're going to send it back. So perform, evaluate, and remove.
Yeah, cool. It's a system for it. Break it down into those three. I was going to ask what would, because you've got 3 shows currently. That's correct, right? What
Yes, that is correct.
yeah, what would you say has been the biggest guiding what's been the most effective in getting people to your shows? Would you say is there one thing, or it's spread across? For me personally, like one of the most helpful things I had was a feature from a podcasting platform. They put me on the front of the app for quite a while. That
Mhm.
helped me build a base that got me going. But it's been a little bit debatable for me what else has been the most kind of effective. It's kind of a gray area. What for you would you say brings the most traffic to your shows?
Yeah, this is tough, right? Because
Mm.
it changes too. Like my podcast, when it first launched or within the first year of it launching, was like top 25 in Apple podcast charts for technology. Um, and so, like a couple of things you can do is play with the name and the description, play with the category because category is going to affect ranking. And if you're ranking, you will get more people to the show. But honestly, the most effective thing for me has been podcast guesting, doing podcast swaps because you're doing that uh you're looking for that look-alike audience, right? And so I always tell the story about Friends. I'm a huge Friends fan. I'm like a 90s kid. And in season 1 they were getting like 16, 17 million views per night. This was at a time where you could only watch a show at that one time and you could only watch TV on TV. So like 16, 17 million wasn't necessarily a lot. And then halfway through season 1, they did a 2-part episode called The One with Two Parts. And in part 1, they had the cast from Mad About You, which led into
Mhm.
Friends. And in part 2, they had the cast from ER, which Friends led into. What they did here was capture lookalike audiences. They were all shows about 20 somethings in big cities trying to balance work and life, and they had similar viewership. After that, Friends was seeing 21, 24, 27 million views per episode. So if you are going on a podcast that is in alignment with your audience and you talk about your podcast and you get people to subscribe to your podcast in the same app where they're listening to the show you're guesting on, you're going to have an easier time capturing them versus just like tweeting, "Hey, I have a new episode out," or like posting a short form video on TikTok that's like, "Hey, go listen to this podcast episode."
Yeah, no, smart move by the Friends guys to tap into those other audiences, man. But especially back then, like 90s.
Yeah. Tale as
Um,
old as time, right? I mean, celebrities do press junkets for the same reason,
mm.
right? They'll sit in a room and there'll be a rotating group of hosts from different TV stations and they just talk about the movie.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the social media thing too, because that's another possibly overwhelming time consuming aspect of it. It's like you've put the whole episode together and then bang, you got to do reels. I mean, that has obviously been a lot more simplified as the technology's moving lately. But I'm not sure how much that converts, like the reels about episodes and things. What are your thoughts on like the social media aspect?
That is my thought as perhaps someone too close to it. I always imagine making a short form video and then telling people to listen to your long form content is kind of like if you're if you're like out for a walk after lunch and then somebody in like full marathon runner gear comes up to you and is like, "Hey, run this marathon with me." And you're like, right now, I just ate. I'm in jeans. Um, like I'm not ready to run a marathon. And they're like, "Just run it with me." Right? Like people who are on TikTok are not ready to commit to a 30 to 60-minute podcast episode. That said, you can still make useful content. It just has to be self-contained. And so, what I like to do instead of just clipping up podcast interviews is record a standalone video, right? That's going to look more organic because it's not going to be like some weird like side by side thing or vertical thing. Where I say like, hey, I just interviewed my friend Emily Aborn this week. If you want 4 ways, or here are the 4 ways we talk about where you can market without social media. If you want to learn more, there's a link in the comments. But like you give them the main thing in that, and then I find that is good at least building trust and getting the follow on social.
Yeah, that's cool, the isolated thing, because I think now people are almost programmed in a way when they see that kind of split screen thing. I think they check out a little bit because they're like, well, that's just a clip of something bigger. And like you say, I'm not interested in running the marathon right now. So if you keep it as an isolated thing that gives part of the message, that in itself is a thing, but then they might go to the other as a result. So these sound like really simple things, but I hadn't thought of it in that way because I'm just seeing all these split screens and I'm like, I don't know how effective they are. So I think that's a
Yeah, and it's because like all the tools, right? Descript, Riverside, there's Opus Clip, there's a million of them out there that are like, hey, we're real good at taking your long form content and making 5 60-second clips. And the thing is, they're just all sort of okay, right?
mm,
Because they don't know. They're gonna guess that maybe the most impactful thing is a third of the way through or halfway through, and they'll find a sentence there. I've found that like words always get cut off. Like you're not even giving me a full
yeah,
sentence.
that's true.
Uh and so like then I need to think about, okay, well, is it more work for me to do this and then adjust, or is it easier for me to hold up my phone and talk like realistically, and organically is not the right word, but it's like I'm telling you what you're going to get. I'm telling you the best part of the episode. It's like the opposite of a trailer, right? You're giving away the punchline. And then you're like, if you want more, I've given you the value. If you want more, check out the episode.
Mm. Yeah, no, even as a guest, I've had some things, those little clips, and well-known people deal with this all the time, but things being taken out of context. And like now I've experienced it. I'm like, yeah, I was saying that one thing you've chopped out in a very larger context, and it's just been
Right.
popped out as like a clickbait thing. And I'm like, that's kind of not really, not necessarily effective. It's just wacky because it's
Yeah.
out of context.
And it's like not cool,
Mm,
right? Like if someone comes on my podcast, I recognize that they are giving me their time for free, and my show is usually sponsored, so it's like something that I'm making money off of. I will do everything I can to make them look as good as possible. I've been on shows where like my face was reimagined in AI and it didn't look anything like me, and I'm like, why are you like, I get that the show is about AI, but like I don't appreciate that. Like
mm.
people, I sent it to my friends and I'm like, am I overreacting? And they're like, no, this looks nothing like you. And
Yeah.
I checked all the other guests too, like same thing, like de-aging women and slimming down people. And it's just like I don't know what that accomplishes.
Yeah, that's strange. That's a strange thing. You've offered some awesome little, are they metaphors or analogies? Analogies. They're analogies.
Yeah, I'm a big analogies
You're a
guy,
big
yeah.
analogy guy, but that's awesome. I'm my whole thing is storytelling, and I just, there's so much value in podcasting in terms of storytelling. How important is that to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the thing that impacted me the most, I think, was early in my public speaking career. A friend and mentor, his name is Chris Lemma, gave me some advice. He saw me speak and he's like, "Can I give you some advice?" And I'm like, "Yes, absolutely." He's an incredible public speaker. And he said, "No one cares about you when you first take the stage." And I said, "Okay, that makes sense. They don't know who I am yet." He said, "You need to hook them with a story." And like ever since then, I have tried to weave stories, and like I'm a teacher, so like analogies come naturally to me. I find it's the best way, connect the dots for people. Like take something they know and then introduce an unfamiliar concept in that context. But that was like a game changer for me. So now every time I approach interviews or writing, I try to start with a story because that's going to make the recipient, the listener, the reader, the user, the viewer, whatever, um, more open to listening to what I have to say.
The visual aspect's cool. Like the analogy before about the marathon runner, I could see that. Like I could imagine eating lunch and someone runs up next to you like sweating. You're trying to chill out, and they're like, "Come with, come with." You can see that. You can see it. So it's it's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tradition on the show to have guests offer some kind of challenge, but this could be anything really. Like, how do you go about managing your time is the first part of the question. But two, do you have a challenge that springs to mind? Could be absolutely anything. Maybe for somebody who's wanting to start podcasting.
Yeah. So I mean, the way I manage my time, and this changes. Like I have to. I have three small kids, and so with school and my, on days my wife works, like I need to really understand my calendar. And so I think the best thing that I do to manage my time is every Sunday, I do my startup routine where I like review my calendar and all the tasks I have to do. And I try to kind of put things in boxes. I use Calendly, and so I have very specific, or I'm sorry, I use cal.com now. I was like on autopilot there for a minute. I use cal.com. And I have like very specific times where I can meet, and that's been a game changer for me. Um, if you want to start a podcast, I think the first thing you need to do is define your podcast mission statement because it is a time commitment. And I can tell you like all the things that you need to automate right out the gate. This is something that I help people with, but you don't really know until you do it, right? You don't really know until you don't know the process until you make the process. And that's going to be different for everybody based on the tools that you use. But your mission statement, who is your podcast for? What problem do they have? And how do you help them solve that problem? Is going to be like the gas in the tank that keeps you going when it gets difficult, when it feels too time consuming. If you're doing it for a good reason and you know it's worth doing, then you'll keep doing it. So that would be my challenge. Really think about that. And this is, I'll say, I'm AI hesitant, but this is a place where AI can be really good. I'm thinking about starting a podcast about this. My target audience is this. They have this problem or they have that problem. Can you come up with a listener avatar for me?
Mm.
And then it comes up with I swear the time when I do this, like it's a real, I feel like it's a real person that I know. And so it's been really effective. And then you can kind of figure out, okay, is this content worth making? And you need to answer that because it's gonna feel like it's not when you're like 10 episodes in and you're getting 20 downloads um, until your show takes off.
Yeah, that chat GTP thing is very specific. It can give you a very specific avatar, which is cool because I've struggled with that in the past. I'm like, I don't know, I can't see this person. So I often just bounce things off chat GTP. I'm kind of AI hesitant like you, but I do bounce things off it, and that just ultimately helps me get to my own decision. It's sort of like instead of ranting at my fiance about something, I just hit it with all these questions until I get to my own answer.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's great for that. That's called rubber ducking in
Okay.
pro. I used to be a programmer, right?
Ah.
Where like you and a person would sit next to each other and you would just kind of talk. I think that's called rubber ducking. Gosh,
Mm.
I'm saying this publicly. I haven't said it in a while. So I'll ask ChatGPT later if that's right. But I tell people to view ChatGPT or whatever their favorite chatbot is as an intern and not as their CMO or their CEO or whatever, right? Because like this is like, oh, ChatGPT can just do this for me. And I'm like, no, that's like the work you're supposed to do. What ChatGPT GPT can do is assist you. right? So like I'll write something. I every time I've had it write something for me, it's been trash. And I think I'm a good writer. Like maybe people think they're terrible writers, but like it's been trash. But when I give it something I've written and I'm like, hey, can you like tweak this for a specific audience or punch it up? Um, I've been very impressed with the results there. So it's definitely there to help you and to provide you with perspective that you can't possibly have, that it has from learning up on apparently all of the internet's content. Um, it's not there to replace you in your most crucial work.
Yeah, and I think the danger of it with the writing, because I'm so passionate about writing as well, and the thing is, it can remove your voice, and that's the thing you actually want to really hold on to. It's like your voice is what you've got, and like you say, that it could just trash that completely and take that out of it. But if you have something, and you need something tweaked or whatever it might be, um, yeah. What do you think of the current climate of podcasting? Like I sort of see it as there was that first initial big wave and those big guys came out of that, some of the biggest in the world. And then there was the kind of call it the next wave, which is perhaps what we're at the tail end of now, which is when did you start? You started back in
2012 is when I launched my
So
first
you'd be
podcast.
you'd be first. You'd be in that
Yeah.
really early old school days,
Yeah.
which is not that long ago. So I sort
Yeah.
of see, and now there's kind of a new way where it's like everyone has a show. Um, I just think it's very exciting, and it's the kind of growth of it they're forecasting, and the way companies are finding ways to have this infrastructure of sponsorship and all. I think it's really exciting. Where do you think it's at and where it's headed? Because it might be over intimidating for some people who want to start.
Yeah. I hear like, aren't there too many podcasts? And I hear it in a way that I've never heard. Like, don't you think there are too many books? Or don't you think there are too many movies or TV shows? Like, no. I like if you have something great that you want to put out in the world and a podcast is the best way to do it, then you should do it. Right. Because even if this is, I said this about blogging too, right? I feel like I've been on the internet for like a million years now. I'm an elder millennial. I was a web developer from the time I was 14. So like I've been around, I guess, a while, but like people are like, aren't there too many blogs? And I'm like, no, because even if they have a blog on the thing that you are most passionate about, it's still not your voice and your experience, right? And to bring it back to AI, like AI writing for you, like I've had people like, oh yeah, I had AI write a book for me. I just trained it on everything I've written. And I'm like, that's everything you've written, but like not everything you've experienced. And AI can only go so far. It can't write a compelling book. And so if you're thinking about doing a podcasting, like bring your perspective. And I think Wes Ko calls it your spiky point of view, your perspective and your life experience, because that's going to be the differentiator, and there is always room for that, right? Nobody's saying there's too many books. There are not too many podcasts.
That's awesome because you have your own unique personal experience of this life. And as you've said, it's individual. Nothing can replicate that. You can offer things through that, and it's unique and different to us all. So there's no way that as the word compelling really stands out because it's like that the unique experiences you've had, they can't, that's what I have a faith in. That's what I really have a faith in, unique personal experience and what you can offer from that. That's why when I was initially like everyone like, holy shit, how's this AI going to affect me as a writer and creative? And then I was like, well, actually it can't live what I've lived or offer, what I have to from what I've experienced and what you've experienced. So yeah, it's very reassuring to remind ourselves of that as this technology ramps up. Um for
I
sure.
uh, I I live near Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which has a strong Amish population. If you're unfamiliar with the Amish population, they largely don't use any technology. They build everything by hand. They don't have cell phones or internet. Like they use lights on their buggies because they have to, but they don't drive cars. They drive horse and buggy. And so they have a great business of building things by hand. And even with the IKEAs and the Walmarts, they are doing well because there is something to be said about getting something quality made, right? And when we're thinking about AI, whether it's, I saw Alex Sanfilippo post today about there are more podcast AI hosts. Would you be a guest on a podcast hosted by AI? And I'm like, no. Like what? So I'm just gonna get like generic questions that I've probably already been asked. When we look at content, I look at it the same way. I can either go the mass produced route and put out something that everyone's putting out because by definition that's what a large language model is, or I can create something bespoke and unique and for my very specific audience. And I can't imagine a world where that loses to the mass produced content.
Absolutely. Craftsmanship. It feels like craft is being kind of smashed away in some, this respect for kind of craft. But there are still many people who still have those skills and are using them. And it's like when the Kindle came, people thought that was going to kill the book, but people still want the real page. They want to feel the page. Like we spend all day on screens. So to have a book in your hand is a relief. I don't necessarily want to read. Yeah. The real page will never, that exactly what you're saying. I think that'll stand the test of time, craftsmanship.
No one, well, I guess it would be a very dark future if this happened, but Kindle can revoke a book I bought, right? Amazon can revoke a book I bought if they want to, technically speaking. Unless someone comes into my house and takes my physical books, I'm always going to have those books, right? Same thing with CDs, right? You can stream music all you want, but if Taylor Swift decides again to pull her music off of Spotify, you're out of luck, you know? So, there's something to be said about the craftsmanship, owning the physical media, having a stake in what you're doing or saying or creating.
For sure. Where can people find you and your shows?
Hey, great question. Thank you. So I'm going to right after this, assuming that we're not live streaming or it's not going to go out in 5 minutes. I'm going to set up a page called podcastworkflows.com/superchargers. And there you will get links to my shows and my social, but you'll also get access to my 40 plus automations database. And so what I would tell you for anybody listening, if you're like, I want to get started with automation, I don't know what's possible, this database will give you templates, but it'll also just show you what's possible. And these are the automations that I use to run my business. So if you're looking for ideas, this is a great resource for that.
That's classic because you're putting that there as a resource, and me as the host of the show, that it's I'm going to be looking at going to that resource myself.
Yeah,
Which is
yeah,
great.
absolutely.
Appreciated.
Yep.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm working on an update for it because I'm working on a course on automations, and I want to have the database kind of up to date. But there's so many there. You'll find something that will work for you.
To bring it home, you said you're a massive Friends fan from the 90s. Is there another piece of art or a song or music or a film that's had a profound impact on you, or a book?
Oh yeah. Masters of Doom is a book about the guys who started ID Software. And so the video game Doom, also from the 90s, created by the two Johns, John Carmack and John Ramirez. It's this story. And it's the story that made me want to be a programmer. But even more than that, it taught me a lot about bootstrapping. And one of my favorite quotes of all time is John Carmack's last quote in the book. It's you don't need millions of dollars in capital to create something great. You just need a computer and enough Diet Coke to get you through the night. We slept on floors. We waded across rivers. And I think that's just so impactful because um, it tells you that if you have the drive and the gumption to create something great, you can create something great.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's a nice way to finish. Yeah, awesome. I haven't seen that book. I'm gonna check it out because I remember the game
Yeah.
as well, the old school Doom game. It was one of the first kind of bigs.
Revolutionized computer
Yeah,
gaming.
and
Like they did things that people said weren't possible.
I worked in an arcade when I was 17 in Australia. That was
Yeah.
quite a wild experience for me.
Yeah, I bet. That's awesome. I lived in an arcade when I was a teenager.
You lived in one.
Well,
Wow.
I spent a lot of time there. I might as well have lived
Okay.
there, I should say.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the one I was in was full of like gang lords and kind of it was
Oh.
it was a crazy place, and they promoted me to manager when I was like 17, and it was like there was kind of incidents happening 2 or 3 times a day, and
Oh man.
it was sort of my my reckoning into manhood, you know.
Yeah, jeez.
Without sounding too extreme. But no, I had an
Yeah.
appreciation because we used to have keys to all the games and we just play all the games and stuff too. But
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
that's awesome.
cool, Joe. Well,
That part is awesome. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time. There's been a lot of insights in a short amount of time. So thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. This was such a fun conversation.
There you go, guys. Honest ratings for the show on Apple are appreciated. If you have a guest suggestion, please feel free to reach out on my website at danielthomas.co. I'm also on social media at Mr. Dan Thomas. Catch you on the next episode.